Winter morning in Chicago was freezing and grey, and snow covered the sidewalks in a layer of icy white. Exhaust fumes hung in the air, city sounds pulsing with life, as if no one noticed reality's fragility. On one side of the street, right before a chic market, a young woman knelt on cold concrete. Caroline Nolan, eyes closed, held her small son, Jack, in her arms. His body was hot, breath shallow, which did not escape maternal instinct. Panic raged within her heart. Please, please, my child. We need food. Her voice sounded like a whisper, as if she lacked strength to raise it higher. Caroline was pale, cheeks sunken, and eyes lacking the shine that once adorned them. Desperate, she watched passers-by who averted their gaze with reluctance, as if fearing her misfortune. Brief glances were full of pity, yet no heart trembled enough to react. Jack was just a 2-year-old boy, but his innocent, sweet smile vanished, replaced by tears. "Mommy, cold," he whispered, wrapped in a tattered quilt that long lost its original color. Caroline hugged him tighter, but her arms were too weak to banish the fears surrounding her. For 2 years, she fought for survival, sharing scraps of hope with a child who didn't understand why life became hell. Memories circled Caroline's mind. Her husband Peter, who loved her above all. Their carefree days when everything was possible. After the tragic accident where Peter died on an icy road, Caroline's life turned into a nightmare. Luther, his older brother, seized the estate and the entire firm, blaming her for failures she didn't know. "I'll take the child soon, darling," Luther repeated, words etching into her heart like a blade. Caroline knew despair's taste. Her dignity never let her surrender. "I can't fail them," she thought, looking at Jack, his tiny hands clutching her blouse. With every moment her determination grew, but hunger and fear were like an endless dark shadow. Suddenly, with a loud whoosh, the market. Doors opened wide, and a short, elegantly dressed man walked out. Maxwell Sterling. His cashmere coat reflected the winter sun's glare, and surrounded by a security entourage, he looked like a king in his kingdom. Despite the luxury surrounding him, something in his gaze stopped on Caroline. He saw in her eyes the same feeling of despair he once saw in his late wife's eyes. Maxwell stepped closer. Caroline, surprised, couldn't believe such a powerful man noticed her. "Please, sir, my child. He is dying," she said, unable to stop tears. Falling to her knees, she felt this was the last attempt. Cold wind whipped her face, but hope glowed in her heart, like a fervent flame of regained trust. Without hesitation, Maxwell issued an order. "To the best private hospital. Immediately." His decisive tone and cold determination in his eyes made Caroline feel dozens of emotional shocks. All the people who walked by earlier held their breath. Something in this moment seemed magical, as if everything could change. In the limousine, wrapped in warmth, Caroline could not believe what was happening. Just a moment ago, she stood on cold concrete, praying for food. Now she sat beside a man who looked like he could completely transform her life. Although her heart still beat fast with fear, hope began appearing in her soul, seeming impossible during the dark times she passed. In the hospital, doctors quickly attended to Jack. Caroline stood aside, watching their movements as if in a trance. She paused a moment, returning to worst memories. But Maxwell was by her. His presence was like an anchor in a stormy sea. As the young mother told him her story, every word she spoke sounded like a lament. About Peter, Luther, the loss of everything she had. His eyes hardened with every word. When Jack was placed in the ward, Maxwell turned to Caroline with a sense of gravity. "Stay. In my house. You and the boy. Never leave. I will handle this," His voice was calm, intentions sincere. Caroline couldn't believe someone who had so much wanted to help her. It was a moment where life could gain colors again, and suffering could be behind them. She looked at him, feeling difficulties begin to crack, and old fear begin to vanish. She agreed, though doubts lingered in her heart. Why would a stranger help me? She thought, but in his eyes she saw something that told her to believe. For the first time in ages she could breathe. But was this the end of her torment, or the start of a new drama about to unfold? After all, Luther, who wasn't ready to lose power, would never let go. Caroline stood in the hospital corridor, wrapped in a warm blanket. Maxwell brought her right after arriving. Jack was already in doctor's hands, and she felt as if floating in air, separated from a reality that suddenly became so alien. On one hand, she felt unspeakable relief that her son was in good hands. Yet on the other, fear of what might happen. Every sound of muffled conversations, every sound of footsteps on the floor, pulled her back to the cruel reality where she had to fight for survival. Maxwell sat beside her, his presence like an oasis of calm in a stormy sea. He looked at her with attention, as if trying to read all her thoughts. "What happened?" he asked finally, his voice warm but simultaneously full of determination. Caroline took a deep breath, feeling this might be the moment she finally tells her story. "My husband, Peter, died in an accident," she began, her voice trembling. "Luther, his brother, took everything. He said he left me debts and I had no choice. I had to sign those documents. I didn't know what I was doing." Tears flooded her eyes, but she couldn't allow herself to shed them. She had to be strong, especially now. Maxwell listened, his face expressing compassion, but also anger. "It's not your fault, Caroline. You cannot take responsibility for what your brother-in-law did," he said with conviction. His words were like balm on her wounds. In this moment, she understood she isn't alone, that someone believes in her innocence. "But I have nothing," she continued, feeling reality's weight crush her to the ground. "I lost the house, money, everything. Now I am homeless. And Jack," her voice shook and tears appeared in her eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without him." Maxwell hugged her, and she felt the warmth of his arms. It was something she desired for so long, a sense of safety that seemed so distant. "Don't worry. Now you are in my home, and I won't let anyone hurt you," he promised, his tone full of determination. "We will fight for your rights. You have a right to life, to dignity, to happiness." Caroline looked into his eyes, seeing the power she needed there. She knew she couldn't let Luther destroy what remained of her life. "What do you intend to do?" she asked, unsure if she can believe promises she just heard. Maxwell smiled, his eyes sparking. "First we must ensure Jack is healthy. Then we will deal with Luther. I have people who will help us discover the truth. We will need evidence, but I have the means to do it." "What do you mean?" Caroline was surprised by his certainty. "I'll hire a detective who will investigate the circumstances of your husband's death. I am convinced it wasn't a regular accident. We must also find someone who testifies in your favor, someone who knows the truth about Luther." Caroline felt hope slowly blooming in her heart. Maybe she could finally regain control over her life. "Thank you, Maxwell. I never thought anyone would help me," she said, voice full of gratitude. Suddenly, a doctor walked out of the medical room, face serious. "Mrs. Nolan?" he asked, and Caroline rose from her seat, ready for the worst. "How is my son?" she asked, heart beating like mad. "Jack is stable, but he must stay in the hospital for observation. We suspect pneumonia, but we are optimistic." Caroline sighed with relief, but felt another surge of fear. What's next? What happens when Luther learns Jack is under a millionaire's care? Maxwell noticed her worry. "Don't worry, Caroline. We will do everything to protect him. he promised, determination in his eyes giving her strength. As days passed, Caroline and Jack moved into Maxwell's estate. The place was beautiful, surrounded by a garden, but fear still remained in her heart. She feared Luther wouldn't let go, that his dark plans would still threaten her. Luther found out where they were. A furious light flashed in his eyes, and revenge plans began birthing in his dark soul. Since she found shelter with a millionaire, there is no way I'll allow her this. I must do something about it, he spoke to himself, heart full of hate. Caroline, unaware of dangers lurking for her, tried to find herself in this new life. With every day at Maxwell's estate, she felt more comfortable, but uncertainty remained in her heart. When one evening, sitting by the fireplace, she began talking to Maxwell about her life, she realized she could trust him. Meanwhile, he watched her with interest, their conversation becoming increasingly personal. "Sometimes I think this is all a dream," she said suddenly, voice trembling, "like I don't deserve this happiness." Maxwell moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve everything best, Caroline. Don't let the past decide your future." In this moment, new hope was born in Caroline's heart. Maybe she finally found someone who would not only protect her but also help regain what she lost. The change that took over her life was great, but fear of Luther still cast a shadow on her new reality. Unexpectedly, the smell of burning reached their senses. Caroline looked at Maxwell, seeing anxiety in his eyes. "What was that?" she asked, panic beginning to ring in her voice. Maxwell stood up, face taking a serious expression. "We must check what is happening." At this moment, uncertainty barged into the estate. Luther could be closer than they thought. Caroline sat in the spacious, elegant dining room of Maxwell's estate, surrounded by delicate light from lamps hanging above the table. She felt like she was in a fairy tale, but couldn't ignore the feeling of unreality still accompanying her. Jack slept in the room next door, and she struggled with thoughts of Luther, about his fraud that ruined her life. Maxwell, sitting opposite her, studied her face, as if trying to see something more than just sadness. After a moment of silence, he stood and walked to the window where sun rays entered. He looked thoughtful, and Caroline felt his thoughts circling a plan of action. "We must act fast," he said finally, returning to the table. His voice was decisive. "Luther won't rest until he destroys you completely." Caroline nodded, feeling rising fear. She knew Luther was a monster, but didn't realize how far he could go. "What do you want to do?" she asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I'll hire the best lawyers and detectives in the country. We must gather evidence against him. We must find out exactly how your husband died." Maxwell spoke with passion, every word giving Caroline courage. "But how can we do this? He has influence and I have nothing," she replied, staring at the table where plates with food scraps lay. "Leave that to me. I know people who can help. I believe we will find someone to confirm your version. We just need to act fast," Maxwell added, eyes shining with determination. Caroline felt hope being born in her heart. Maybe she really could regain control of her life, but she still had many doubts. "And what if no one believes us?" she asked, voice full of fear. "I will be by your side. I won't let him destroy you," he promised, tone full of warmth. Suddenly Jack entered the dining room, face still sleepy. Caroline immediately stood to hug him, feeling the warmth flowing from her son soothe her worries. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" she asked, wiping his cheeks. "Mommy." "Where are we?" he asked, disoriented. "We are home, Jack, in a new home," she replied, trying to give her voice joy, though fear was in her heart. Maxwell knelt beside the boy. "Jack, you are very brave. Remember, I will be here to protect you," he said, voice warm and full of understanding. Caroline looked at Maxwell, seeing in him not just a millionaire, but a man who truly cares. In this moment, she understood she must trust him completely. "What do you want to do today, little one?" Maxwell asked, trying to diffuse the tension. "I want to draw," Jack replied, eyes lighting up with joy. Caroline smiled, seeing her son's enthusiasm. "We have lots of paper and crayons. Come, show me what you can do," she proposed, and Jack pulled her hand, leading to the large room where the play area was. As the boy drew, Caroline watched him with tenderness. Every line he put on paper was a reminder of what she fought for. She couldn't let Luther destroy everything she had. Maxwell sat beside them, staring at the drawings. "Maybe in the future you'll be a great artist," he said to Jack, and the boy smiled proudly. "Yes, I want to paint Mommy and Daddy," he replied with zeal, and Caroline felt her heart break. The memory of Peter, his smile, his love for their son, returned with full force. "Your daddy would be proud of you," she said softly, voice trembling. Maxwell noticed her sadness. "Remember, Caroline, you are not alone. I also lost someone I loved, but together we can overcome." "This," he said, a spark of understanding in his eyes. Caroline nodded, trying to control emotions. She knew she must be strong, not just for herself, but above all for Jack. As time passed, Caroline felt the new reality created by Maxwell becoming more tangible. But inside her, fear of Luther still stuck. What happens when he learns her son is safe, and she has the support of a powerful millionaire? When evening approached its end, Caroline looked out the window, where darkness slowly embraced the city. She knew this was only the beginning of the fight with Luther. She had to be ready for whatever the future brings. Suddenly, the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Caroline froze, and Maxwell stood up, face becoming serious. "Who can that be?" he asked, heading toward the door. Caroline felt her heart speed up. What if it's Luther? What if he came to destroy everything they built? Maxwell opened the door, and a figure stood before them Caroline didn't expect. "We have a problem," the man said, anxiety ringing in his voice. Caroline felt a cold chill pass down her spine. This was the moment her whole world could collapse. Caroline and Jack spent time in the great room, where light gently entered through windows, illuminating the boys' colorful drawings. Maxwell, sitting nearby, watched them with a smile. Every color Jack chose seemed to symbolize hope. Caroline was beginning to see anew in her life. Her heart beat stronger with every drawing, and thoughts of Luther, though still present, gave way to new possibilities. "Mommy, look!" Jack shouted, showing a drawing where he painted himself. Caroline and Daddy hand in hand, smiling in a sunny park. Caroline felt tears flood her eyes. Emotion made her hug her son tighter, feeling his warmth fill the void Peter left. "It's beautiful, Jack. Your daddy would be proud," she replied, trying to keep calm. She realized that although Peter couldn't be with them, their memories were alive. Maxwell, seeing her emotions, decided to introduce them to something new that could distract their thoughts from sadness. "Boys, how about a little trip?" he asked, voice full of joy. "There is a beautiful place nearby where we can go for a walk and spend time in fresh air." Jack jumped with enthusiasm, and Caroline felt this might be exactly what they needed. "Yes, I want to go," the boy called out, eyes shining with joy. "Good. In that case, I'll prepare something to eat," Maxwell said, rising from his seat. "And you can change into something warmer." Caroline and Jack exchanged looks, then headed to the bedroom to change. Caroline opened the wardrobe, filled with new, elegant clothes. She felt strange wearing them, after such a long time living in poverty. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she noticed her face beginning to regain its former glow. "Mommy, you look pretty," Jack said, and Caroline smiled, feeling her heart warm up. After a moment, they went outside, where the winter sun lit up the Snow. Maxwell waited for them by the car, which was a luxury limousine. Caroline felt slight embarrassment, but simultaneously excitement. During the drive to the park, conversations flowed freely. Maxwell spoke of places he visited and memories from his childhood. Caroline listened with curiosity, and as time passed, her fears began to vanish. When they arrived, Jack quickly jumped out of the car, and Caroline followed, feeling snow crunch under her feet. The park was beautiful. Snowy trees, looking like a fairy tale. Jack gathered snowballs, and Maxwell joined the fun, making Caroline start to smile. "Want to play snowballs?" asked Maxwell, and Jack nodded with enthusiasm. Caroline watched as both men played their best, her heart filling with joy. She saw in Maxwell someone who was not only her savior, but also someone who could add joy in difficult moments. However, thoughts of Luther still circulated in her mind. When they returned home, Caroline decided she must take steps to protect herself and Jack. She knew Luther wouldn't rest until he destroyed their lives. "Maxwell," she began, feeling her heart beat faster, "we must talk about how we can secure ourselves against Luther." Maxwell looked at her seriously. "You're right. We must be ready for anything. I won't let him hurt you," he replied, voice full of determination. Caroline felt hope rising in her, but simultaneously feared what the future brings. "I am ready for whatever needs to be done. I must fight for Jack," she said, eyes shining with determination. Maxwell smiled, seeing in her a strength she had no idea she possessed within. "Together we'll make it. We will handle this, and Luther has no chance," he assured her, certainty in his voice giving Caroline courage. However, as hope grew, Luther didn't stay behind. He knew Caroline is now in a better situation, and surely planned a step that could ruin their newly gained peace. Caroline didn't know that with every day Luther became more desperate, and his plans more dangerous. As days passed, dark clouds gathered over their new life, and Caroline had to be ready to face what was coming. Caroline and Jack returned to Maxwell's estate, feeling their new home becoming a place where they can finally find peace. Jack ran around the garden, his joyful laughter bouncing off the villa walls. Caroline sat on the terrace, staring at the landscape that was both beautiful and overwhelming. She felt she was slowly beginning to understand how she deserved this new reality, but couldn't ignore the shadow of the past still hanging over her. Maxwell, bringing cups of tea, noticed her contemplation. He sat beside her, his presence a source of comfort for Caroline. "I think it's time to handle legal matters," he said, tone serious. "I've already hired the best specialists. They will handle documents and evidence to help you regain what belongs to you." Caroline nodded, heart beating stronger. Finally, she had the support she needed so much. "Thank you, Maxwell. I don't know what I'd do without you," she confessed, voice full of gratitude, but anxiety still spoke in her soul. "We must be ready for everything that might happen," Maxwell added, face revealing determination. "Luther won't rest until he destroys your life. We must be vigilant." At this moment, Caroline felt a shiver of terror. Luther was ready for anything to regain control of the situation. She knew she was dealing with a ruthless man who wouldn't stop at anything. "What can we do?" she asked, voice trembling with fear. Maxwell looked into her eyes. "I have a plan. I hired a detective who will handle checking everything Luther could prepare against you. I want you to be safe," he said with full conviction. "And if need be, I'll contact the police." Caroline breathed deeply. Although she felt relief, fear still appeared in her heart. Fear of Luther, of his revenge. She found herself in a situation that seemed insurmountable. Yet in Maxwell's presence, she felt she had an ally, someone who truly wants to help her. Several days later, Caroline received a message that shook her world. It was a letter from Luther. Inside were threats and slanders that collided with her new life. "You can't escape me," read the first paragraph. "No one will believe your lies. You are just a poor widow trying to manipulate a rich man." Caroline felt her heart freeze. She knew Luther wouldn't give in, and his words were like poison, slowly poisoning her. Peace. She swallowed with difficulty, feeling a wave of panic flood her mind. Of course, he would try to discredit her, and not just in society's eyes, but also in the court's eyes. When Maxwell returned home, Caroline had no choice. She had to tell him everything. With a trembling hand, she handed him the letter, and he, as soon as he read it, turned his face to stone. "We cannot ignore this. This is serious," he said, voice full of determination. "What should we do?" she asked, voice full of worry. "We must gather evidence that he is dangerous. We must show he is wrong in what he writes," he replied, gaze becoming decisive. "I'll hire the best lawyers to help us in this matter. You cannot be afraid, Caroline." Caroline looked into his eyes, seeing not just determination, but something more: protection, support that could help her survive this difficult time. "Thank you, Maxwell. I will do everything in my power not to let Luther win," she replied, voice gaining new strength. As days passed, Maxwell organized meetings with lawyers and detectives, and Caroline began to feel she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long while, she had a sense that the fight for her life was taking a different shape. However, Luther, seeing Caroline and Maxwell united, decided to go on the offensive. His revenge approached faster and faster. Day by day, his plan became more complicated. Caroline didn't know it, but Luther had his people watching their every move, gathering information that could turn against them. One evening, when Caroline returned home, she noticed something was wrong. A cold shiver passed through her when she saw her bedroom door slightly ajar. With heart beating in her chest, she approached the door, worst possible fears appearing in her mind. Who could be here? Is it Luther? Did his people start following her? She paused a moment to gather thoughts, then slowly opened the door. Holding her breath, Caroline sat on the wide terrace, still feeling the weight of Luther's letter in her hand. His threats were like a shadow constantly haunting her. In her thoughts, she returned to the words she read, trying to find sense in them. Every sentence was like another blow, and she felt she was closing in a cage of fear she couldn't open. Jack ran in the garden, his carefree laughter filling the space, but even his joy couldn't disperse the darkness surrounding her. Maxwell, noticing her anxiety, sat beside her, his presence like a shield meant to protect her from incoming madness. "We must act fast," he said with determination, tone full of conviction. "I hired a detective who will handle Luther. I want him under constant observation. We can't let his slanders ruin your life." Caroline nodded, feeling she finally has something she desired so much: support. "What should we do next?" she asked, voice trembling with emotion. "We gather evidence," Maxwell replied, looking into the distance. "We must show he is the dangerous one. I'll organize a meeting with our lawyer. I want you to be ready for it." Caroline felt determination returning to her heart. She knew she must fight for her rights, for Jack, for a future that could be full of hope if only they find a way to defeat Luther. Several days later, as Caroline sat in the dining room listening to Maxwell's conversations with lawyers, Luther's words returned to her mind. She tried to ignore them, but they were like an echo in her head, giving no peace. "I am mentally ill," people in the city said, and she heard these whispered accusations like knives stabbing her heart. Maxwell noticed her contemplation. "Caroline, don't listen to what they say. It's just manipulation. Luther wants you to feel guilty, but he is the monster." "I know, but—" she began, so much emotion in her voice. Sometimes I feel it might be true. Maxwell placed a hand on her shoulder, touch full of warmth. You are not alone. Together we will get through this. Belief in yourself is key. You must know you have a right to happiness, and Luther has no right to take it from you. Caroline remembered how much she valued what Maxwell did for her. He was a rock for her when her life lay in ruins. As days passed, their relationship became stronger, and she began to feel she finally has someone who understands her. However, Luther, seeing Caroline and Maxwell united, didn't intend to give up. His anger grew, revenge plans swirling in his head. He decided it was time for a new strategy. He began a slander campaign in the media aimed at discrediting Caroline in society's eyes. He hired a group of people tasked with spreading lies about her mental instability. False testimonies appeared on TV, and people started whispering behind her back. Caroline couldn't believe someone could be so ruthless. She knew she must defend herself, but felt as if this fight was unwinnable. Maxwell, seeing Luther attack her reputation, decided to act. He organized a meeting with the detective meant to investigate all slanders. We must gather evidence against Luther, he said, voice full of determination. What he is doing is illegal, and we must show him he cannot hurt others with impunity. Caroline, feeling she has an ally, decided to fight to the end. I will do everything in my power to prove he is the threat, she repeated, voice gaining new strength. Maxwell smiled, seeing Caroline begin to regain self-confidence. Together, we'll make it. Remember, truth always comes out. At night, as Caroline lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Luther circled her head. She felt his revenge was close. At one moment she heard the doorbell sound. Her heart froze. Who could come at such a late hour? Maxwell immediately got up, and Caroline felt fear engulf her heart. She knew Luther wouldn't rest until he destroyed everything they built together. When Maxwell opened the door, Caroline heard a voice that now rang in her ears like the worst nightmare. "Luther!" shouted Maxwell, and Caroline felt a cold shiver pass down her spine. This was exactly the moment she feared. She felt everything they built could be in danger. Brief whispering outside, and her heart beat in a rhythm of fear. Luther didn't intend to back down. Now, what was coming could be just the beginning of the hardest fight in her life. Caroline sat on the terrace, staring at the garden greenery, but her thoughts still circled around Luther. His words were like a sharp knife constantly wounding her heart. She recalled how afraid she was that no one would believe her, that no one would stand by her side. However, Maxwell gave her strength, made her feel she isn't alone in this fight. A few days later, when at breakfast, Maxwell introduced her to details of his plan. Detective Reynolds walked into their house, a man with a penetrating gaze and sure step. Caroline couldn't hide the lightness in her heart. Here came the moment she waited for. "Good morning, Mrs. Nolan," Reynolds greeted, voice low and full of trust. "I will handle Luther's case. We must act fast before he expands his slanders." Maxwell nodded, determination visible in his eyes. "Reynolds, search every possibility. We must have evidence of his fraud and manipulation." Caroline tried with all her might to focus on the conversation, yet thoughts kept returning to what Luther might do when he learns they are in contact with a detective. As the conversation went on, she felt fear beginning to give way to determination. Reynolds looked at Caroline as if trying to assess her state. "Mrs. Nolan, is there anything you would like to add? Any details that might help the investigation?" Caroline took a deep breath. "I must tell you about the sabotage of the brakes in Peter's car. I know it might sound crazy, but all this took place right before his death. Luther could be behind it." Reynolds took this seriously. "I understand. We must investigate this. Every detail can be important. even the smallest. Maxwell stood up, his presence becoming even more dominant. "Reynolds, contact the mechanic who serviced Peter's car. Maybe he knew something we missed." Caroline felt hope waking in her heart. She wasn't that defenseless woman Luther wanted to see anymore. With every day, with every meeting with Maxwell, she regained part of herself she lost. Reynolds immediately proceeded to action. Within a few days, he gathered information on Luther, checking his activities and financial history. Caroline felt as if she finally had an opportunity to explain her situation. Every meeting with Reynolds and Maxwell brought her closer to the truth, to justice that was finally to be served. One evening, during dinner, Reynolds came with news. His face was serious, but a spark of triumph shone in his eyes. "We have a new witness who agreed to testify. It's the mechanic who worked on Peter's car. He admitted to sabotage." The detective's words sounded like music to Caroline. "Really?" she asked, unable to believe what she hears. "Yes, his name is Andrew. He agreed to speak in court. He claims he was under pressure from Luther, but finally decided to reveal the truth," explained Reynolds. Caroline felt her heart start beating faster. It was the chance she desired for so long. However, Luther's words still rang in her head, his threats that didn't subside. What if he found out his plan failed? What if he wanted revenge? Maxwell noticed her anxiety. "Don't worry, Caroline. Now we have evidence showing Luther is a monster. We won't let him hurt you." Caroline looked at him with gratitude. She knew she had support that could change everything. With every day, with every step toward justice, she felt she was starting to live again. However, Luther, sensing his plans were crumbling, began to act. He hired people to follow Caroline and Maxwell, trying to find anything that could turn against them. This was his last resort. Maxwell realized the danger. "We cannot give him a chance. Caroline, you must be careful. Luther is ruthless and won't stop at anything to hurt you." Caroline nodded, feeling fear start to engulf her again. But this time, she was stronger. She had Maxwell and the detective fighting for truth by her side. She knew she couldn't give up. She must fight for Jack, for herself, for the future. At night, when she went to sleep, her mind still circled around Luther and what he might do. She felt this was just the beginning of the fight, and truth was still within reach. She had to be ready for everything that could happen. 2 days later, at a moment when it seemed everything was going well, information arrived that froze the blood in Caroline's veins. Luther, finally desperate, decided to reveal his threats publicly, threatening to destroy everything she managed to rebuild. It was the moment fear became reality, and Caroline understood she isn't just fighting for truth, but also for her life. Caroline got up in the morning, heart full of hope, but also anxiety. She heard sounds from the kitchen where Maxwell prepared breakfast. The aroma of fresh bread and coffee filled the space, but her thoughts circled around the upcoming meeting with the mechanic. This was to be the decisive moment that could change the course of the case. Her hands trembled at the thought of what might happen. When she entered the dining room, Maxwell smiled at her, but she noticed a shadow of worry in his eyes. "Good morning, Caroline. How do you feel?" he asked, watching her hold her hands on the table, as if trying to find certainty in this gesture. "I'm a little nervous," she replied, voice trembling. "This meeting with Andrew, I'm afraid I won't be able to tell properly what happened. Remember, you are strong. Speak the truth, and that is enough. I will be with you," Maxwell said, placing a hand on her shoulder. This support gave her courage. After a moment, Reynolds appeared in the doorway, followed by a man with an expressive face who looked worried but determined. "This is Andrew," Reynolds introduced him, and the mechanic nodded toward Caroline. "Good morning, Mrs. Nolan," he said, voice low and full of jitters. "Thank you for calling me. I wanted to tell you about that night. Caroline sat at the table, feeling her heart beat faster. Andrew took a seat opposite her, and she noticed sadness and regret in his eyes. Maxwell and Reynolds sat nearby, ready to listen. I was always loyal to Luther, but what I saw gave me no peace. Andrew began, taking a breath. I worked on Peter's car. Then, at night when he arrived, Luther was there. I saw him tampering with the brakes. Caroline felt a cold shiver run down her back. It was intentional, she asked, unable to believe she is hearing what she hears. It seemed to me something is wrong, but Luther was convincing. He said Peter cares about being the best. I didn't want to be involved in their affairs, but when I heard about the accident, I felt I must confess. Andrew spoke, quieter and quieter, as if ashamed of his own words. Can you repeat this in court? Asked Reynolds, staring at Andrew as if trying to exert pressure. Yes, I promise. I want truth to come out, said the mechanic, voice now more certain. Caroline felt hope growing in her heart. Thanks to Andrew, she could finally reveal what stayed in shadow for so long. But at a certain moment, fear appeared again. What if Luther found out about this testimony? What if he reacted even more aggressively? We must act fast, said Maxwell, interrupting her thoughts. Reynolds, contact the attorney. We must prepare everything before the hearing. Andrew nodded, and Caroline felt she finally begins to regain control over her life. After years of fear and uncertainty, she finally had a chance for justice. As days passed, Maxwell tried to make Caroline feel safe. He introduced additional security measures and hired several people meant to follow her and ensure no one gets close. Caroline began to feel like in a fairy tale, but somewhere deep in her soul, she still felt fear of Luther. One evening, during a walk in the garden, Caroline met Hannah Brooks, Luther's former housekeeper. The woman was pale and weakened, but a spark of determination still glowed in her eyes. Mrs. Brooks, I am glad to see you, said Caroline, trying to smile, but a tremor was audible in her voice. Caroline, I brought something important, Hannah began, deep concern ringing in her voice. I know Luther is dangerous. I saw him sabotage the brakes. You must know this. Caroline's heart beat stronger. This was what she needed. Not just Andrew, but also Hannah could be a witness to the truth. Can you testify? She asked uncertainly, feeling every moment is precious. Yes, but you must be careful. Luther won't stop at anything to hurt you. I know this from own experience, replied Hannah, fear audible in her voice. Caroline nodded, feeling her determination grow. She was ready to face Luther, but simultaneously knew the threat was still real. As they organized for the fight, an unpleasant thought appeared in her mind. What if Luther carried out his plans before they managed to stop him? Knowing time works against them, Maxwell called a meeting with Reynolds and Andrew to discuss further steps. Caroline, with a heart full of uncertainty, could only pray everything went according to plan, and justice was finally served. The meeting took place in Maxwell's elegant office. Everyone was tense, but determination was visible in their eyes. Caroline felt emotions rising within her. She knew this was her moment to finally reveal the truth. We must act fast before Luther strikes again, said Maxwell, voice firm. Caroline, are you ready? All eyes turned to her. This was the moment she had to make a decision that could change everything. Caroline sat at the table, heart beating faster, as Andrew, the mechanic, told of the note that shook her world. Every word he uttered gave her chills. In her head, she had the image of Peter behind the wheel, unaware of incoming danger. Maxwell and Reynolds sat beside her, listening intently. With every sentence of Andrew's, hope for justice woke in Caroline, but fear of Luther still overwhelmed her. You must file a testimony, said Reynolds, staring at Andrew. Your words will be key. The mechanic nodded, but anxiety was still in his eyes. "I'm afraid Luther will take revenge. He has influence, and I am just an ordinary man." Caroline felt anger rising in her heart. "You cannot let fear rule your life. You must fight for the truth," she said, voice full of determination. Andrew looked at her, and a flash of new hope appeared in his eyes. "You're right. I must do this, not just for you, but for Peter." Maxwell, who remained silent until now, finally spoke. "We have evidence that can help. We are cooperating with a detective who is already acting. We'll see what possibilities we have." Caroline noticed that although her life was still full of uncertainty, she finally had people around who wanted to help her. She felt strength growing in her heart. As Andrew told of events from years ago, her thoughts began to wander. What if Luther learns what they plan? What if he tries to stop them? A few days later, the case began to pick up pace. Media, heated with news of Luther's trial, set to take place soon, bombarded people with information about the family tragedy. Caroline became the central figure in this story, and her history aroused emotions. Photos appeared in newspapers presenting her as a young widow fighting for justice for her deceased husband. Maxwell organized a press conference where she could express her feelings. When she stood before journalists, she felt fear vanish. Instead, determination accompanied her. "My life was destroyed by lies and fraud," she spoke, voice strong. "I do not intend to be intimidated. I want truth to come out, for my son to know his father." Despite this, thoughts of Luther returned from everywhere. His threats, his manipulations. She knew the man was capable of anything to protect his secrets. She had to be ready for anything. However, as days passed, Caroline began to feel increasingly sure. Maxwell's support, his care and determination, gave her strength. Every day she spent with Jack, enjoying moments in the garden where his laughter was like light in dark times. She discovered new layers of courage in herself, and the vision of justice became increasingly real. One evening, during dinner, Maxwell looked at her seriously. "Caroline, we must be prepared for what might happen. Luther has his influence, and we must be careful." Caroline nodded, feeling determination grow in her chest. "I won't let him intimidate me. I hope Andrew and Hannah will be able to testify. We must convince the court Luther is responsible for the accident." Maxwell smiled, seeing her zeal. "Yes, you're right. We must act fast before Luther gains advantage." When the day of the hearing arrived, Caroline felt tension rising in the air. The courtroom was filled with people, and among them she spotted Luther. His cold gaze pierced her, but in this moment she couldn't let fear take over. When the judge entered the room and everyone stood, Caroline felt the time for truth finally arrived. As the hearing picked up pace, hope rose in her heart. Witnesses who testified gave her support, and every single piece of evidence presented confirmed what she knew all along. Luther was guilty. However, at a certain moment, as Caroline and Maxwell sat side by side, Luther surprised everyone. He stood up, voice ringing in the hall like thunder. "It's a lie!" he shouted, eyes burning with hate. "She is not credible. She is responsible for everything." The room froze. Caroline felt a cold shiver run down her back. What was meant to be a day of justice suddenly turned into something much more dangerous. Every word of Luther's was like a shot. Every emotion she suppressed exploded in this moment. She knew she must defend herself, but how? Maxwell looked at her with determination. "You must speak, Caroline. Truth is on your side," he said, voice a low whisper full of encouragement. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she had new strength within. She looked at Luther, and determination settled in her eyes. "I won't let myself be intimidated," she shouted, voice sounding like a bell amidst Luther's screams. The judge struck the gavel, trying to restore order, but certainty grew in Caroline's heart. She knew this is her fight, and the fight for truth was starting now. Caroline sat in the court bench, heart beating like a hammer. Every word of the judge sounded like an echo in her ears. The room was filled with people, and her gaze wandered faces, trying to find support. In a dark corner of the room, she spotted Luther. His cold gaze gave her chills, but in this moment, she couldn't let fear take over. She knew what will happen decides her future, and Jack's future. The first witness, Andrew, stood before the court. He trembled when he looked at Luther, but Caroline could see determination in his eyes. In her head, she had his words about sabotage, about what he saw that night Peter lost his life. Andrew took a deep breath and began to speak. "I was Peter's mechanic," he started uncertainly. "I remember the evening his car had a breakdown. I entered the garage and noticed the brakes were subjected to manipulation. Someone must have faked them." Caroline felt her heart speed up. What he said had huge significance. Every word constituted a brick in building her case. Luther sat, face becoming increasingly grey, as if his self-confidence began to weaken. "Could you point to the person who could have done this?" asked the judge, and Caroline held her breath, feeling the whole room hold breath with her. Andrew nodded. Yes, Luther, Peter's brother, was jealous of his successes. "I met him in the garage multiple times," he said, voice becoming increasingly certain. "I know he had a reason to want Peter gone." Andrew's words made silence fall in the room. Everyone present stared at Luther, who now tried to hide anger. His lips were tightened in a hard line, eyes as if burning. The next witness was Hannah Brooks, Luther's former housekeeper. She was led into the room, face pale as if bringing the weight of years of hidden truth. Caroline immediately noticed something changed in her eyes. She was ready to tell the truth. "I've known this family for years," she began, voice trembling. "I saw Luther sabotage the brakes in Peter's car. I couldn't bear it. I knew it was murder." Caroline felt anger grow in her chest. Hannah's every word was like a blow to Luther. The awareness that finally someone dared stand against him filled her with hope. "Why were you silent for so many years?" asked the prosecutor, looking at Hannah with care. "I was afraid," she confessed, eyes glazing with tears. "Luther was a powerful man, and I was just a weak woman. But now I know I must do this. I must tell the truth before it is too late." As Hannah finished her testimony, Caroline noticed Luther trying to control his emotions. His face was now red, hands clenched into fists. He directed a frozen gaze at Caroline, and she felt this is a clash, deciding their further fates. When Hannah sat down, the prosecutor submitted evidence, expert opinions regarding brakes, and the false will Luther presented to Caroline. The gathered materials were terrifying. Every evidence was a drop filling the glass, bringing Caroline closer to justice. As time passed, she saw Luther's self-confidence begin to crumble under the pressure of this evidence. His eyes betrayed terror, and Caroline knew their fight was heading toward an end. When the prosecutor finished his presentation, the judge turned to Luther. "Do you want to speak in this matter?" he asked. Luther stood up, voice full of rage. "It's lies. She is a crazy widow who can't bear the loss. I had nothing to do with this." Caroline felt pressure in the room rise. Her heart beat hard, but now she had no intention of backing down. She stood up, and the room froze. "It's not true," she shouted, voice sounding strong and decisive. "You are responsible for Peter's death. Your lies ruined my life." The judge raised a hand to restore order, but Caroline felt now is the moment she can fight for truth. "And I won't let you intimidate me," she added, fire of determination burning in her eyes. Silence fell in the room, and everyone looked at Luther, who looked lost. Caroline knew this fight is far from over, but had an impression truth will finally win. However, deep in her heart, she felt this is just the beginning. She knew Luther doesn't intend to give up so easily. With every day he became more dangerous, and she and her loved ones had to be prepared for everything that might come. When the judge announced a break in the hearing, Caroline looked at Maxwell sitting beside her. His eyes were full of support, but also understanding that time for the fight is coming. Caroline knew this isn't the end, but now she had people by her side who won't let her fall. Caroline stood with head held high, feeling a wave of determination pass through her body. Luther, still staring at her with hate, seemed to lose ground under his feet. The smell of tension floated in the air, and her heart beat in a rhythm of hope. She crossed the threshold of fear, ready for confrontation. "It's not true," she repeated, strength ringing in her voice she didn't expect herself. "You are responsible for Peter's death. Your lies ruined my life." Single words had power Luther couldn't ignore. He stood up, face purple with anger. He tried to defend himself, but his voice sounded more like a scream of despair than an accusation. "It's a lie. You broke me. You destroyed my family," he screamed. But in his eyes, Caroline spotted fear. Fear of revealing truth. Fear of justice that was right. Around the corner, the judge, face serious, decided to react to rising tension. "I ask for silence in the courtroom," he called, voice sounding like the sound of a hammer hitting the table. "Continue, Caroline." Caroline, feeling the judge's support, focused on evidence. She knew she can't let fear return. Every word she spoke was a step toward a new life. "Luther manipulated everything. I know he not only sabotaged the breaks, but also cheated me regarding the will. For years I lived in a lie, and now finally the time has come for truth to see daylight." Luther, seeing his plan falling apart, tried to play on emotions again. "You are the crazy one. Everyone knows you can't take care of your child. You left Jack." Caroline felt blood pulsing in her temples. These were his last moments to exert influence on her. She stood up, not allowing his words to surprise her. "I won't let you intimidate me. Jack is my light, my strength. You have no power over my life." Murmurs of agreement could be heard from the courtroom. Everyone present began watching Luther, who in the face of accusations had no strength to defend himself anymore. The judge, noticing this, decided to make a decision. "Given the presented evidence and witness testimonies, I consider the case sufficiently proven," announced the judge, and the room froze in silence. "Luther Thompson, you are accused of premeditated murder and fraud. The verdict will be announced after the break." In this moment, Caroline felt the weight she carried for years begin to crumble. She placed hands on the table, holding breath. She knew justice will soon triumph. After a short break, the judge returned to the room. Decisiveness was visible in his eyes. "Luther Thompson, in connection with evidence and witness testimonies, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. Your actions caused irreversible suffering, and justice must be served." Whispered shouts rang out in the room. Caroline felt tears flooding her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. Luther, shocked, tried to defend himself, but his protests were just noise in the background. Court security quickly led him out of the room. Caroline looked at Maxwell, who stood beside her with pride in his eyes. He smiled, and she knew this moment was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Finally, she regained everything she lost. With full conviction, she approached Jack, who waited for her in the corner of the room. He looked at her with adoration, his innocent eyes a reflection of hope. Caroline hugged him tight, feeling their life finally begins anew. When they left the room, Caroline looked at the sun illuminating the sky. Before them spread a new future, full of possibilities. In her heart, she felt peace, knowing justice was served, and she and Jack could finally start building their life without fear, without lies. As they walked toward the exit, Caroline felt that with every step she moves away from the past, she was free, and her story was just beginning. Caroline stood in the garden before Maxwell's estate, feeling the sun gently warm her face. It was a new day, a new beginning, which with every breath became more real. Jack ran around her, his laughter like music filling the space with joy. She felt she can finally start anew, after years of constant suffering and fear. "Mommy, look," called Jack, showing her colourful drawings he made in the garden. "It's us, and Daddy, and his fingers pointed to the sky, to flowers, to everything surrounding him. Caroline smiled, and warmth settled in her heart. Finally, she could be the mother she always wanted to be. She didn't have to fear shadows of the past anymore. Luther was behind bars, and she gained freedom. The future she saw before her was full of possibilities. Maxwell approached her, eyes shining. "Caroline, I wanted to talk about plans for the future," he began, voice calm but full of determination. "Now that Luther is convicted, we can handle what is truly important." "Yes, I know. I want Jack to have a better life," she replied, feeling energy rising in her. "I want our story to become inspiration for others." Maxwell nodded. "I thought about transforming Nolan Logistics into a charity foundation. We can help families in need, like yours, and support children who lost parents." Caroline felt emotion overflow her heart. "That's a wonderful idea. I want Jack to know one can change the world, even in the hardest circumstances. Together, we can create something beautiful." Their conversation was interrupted by Jack running up with a flower in hand. "Mommy, for you, for a new beginning," he shouted, handing her a delicate, colourful flower. Caroline took it in her hands, tears flooding her eyes. "Thank you, darling. This is the most beautiful gift I could get." Maxwell looked at her with tenderness. "Together, we will build the future you desire, Caroline. Not just for yourself, but also for Jack and others who need support." As days passed, Caroline began organizing the foundation. With help from her new friend Maxwell, they created an action plan aimed at helping homeless families. Joint efforts united them even more, and their bond became stronger. Caroline soon became known in the community. Her story of inspiration, fight, and victory over adversity attracted media attention. She spoke of strength one can find in darkest moments, of hope that never fades. One day, during the foundation opening, many people gathered. Caroline stood on the podium, heart beating in rhythm of excitement. She looked at faces of people who came to support her. Among them was Maxwell, with pride in his eyes. "Thank you for being here. My story is proof that even in hardest times, one can find strength to fight for one's dreams. I want this foundation to become a place where everyone finds help and support." She spoke, voice sounding strong and sure. The gathered began to applaud, and Caroline felt emotions rising in her. She knew this is just the beginning. After the ceremony, Maxwell approached her, and in his eyes was something more than friendship. "You are amazing, Caroline. Your strength and determination changed not only your life, but also the lives of others." Caroline looked into his eyes, feeling something change within her. "Thanks to you, I feel strong again, not just as a mother, but as a woman who can change the world." Their hands met, and this moment was full of promise. The trust growing between them was the foundation of the new life they built together. When they returned to the garden, Jack played on the grass, and the sun shone bright. Caroline knew she finally found her place. The life spreading before her was full of love, hope, and new purpose. "Mommy, come!" called Jack, pulling her to play. Caroline smiled, feeling now they can be happy. Maxwell looked at her with a smile, and their gazes met. In this moment, both knew the future will be full of challenges, but together they can face everything. Caroline took a deep breath and moved toward her son, ready for everything life brings. From now on, their path led to better, and she felt nothing will stand in her way.